You are standing in front of your bathroom mirror, doing something you've done 10,000 times before. You lift a plastic comb, draw it through your hair, and then you stop. There, tangled in the teeth of the comb, is a small, dark cluster of strands. It's a mundane moment, a daily ritual of grooming that usually goes unnoticed. But here is the paradox. Your body, a machine perfected by 4 billion years of survival, is actively sabotaging one of its most visible defenses. It is spending precious energy to shut down healthy organs, your hair follicles, for no apparent reason. You aren't sick, you aren't injured, and yet, a part of you is being systematically deleted. We treat this as a cosmetic tragedy or a late-night joke, but in the harsh light of evolutionary biology, it makes no sense. Why would a species that survived ice ages and apex predators evolve a self-destruct button for its own scalp? The answer isn't a modern glitch caused by stress or hats. It is an ancient, calculated signal that has been running in our DNA for longer than civilization itself. If your hair is thinning, your body isn't failing. It's following an ancient script that was written before the first pyramid was ever built. To understand when this started, we have to look at the scalp not as a static surface, but as the soil of a vanishing forest. In a healthy forest, the trees grow, fall, and are replaced in a perfect cycle. But in a balding scalp, the soil itself has become toxic to the roots. The primary culprit is a molecule with a name that sounds like a chemical weapon: dihydrotestosterone, or DHT. This is a byproduct of testosterone, converted by an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase that sits quietly in your oil glands. For some men, their follicles are genetically programmed to be hypersensitive to this molecule. When DHT hits these sensitive follicles, it doesn't kill them instantly. Instead, it triggers a process called miniaturization. Each time a hair falls out and a new one tries to grow, the follicle produces a slightly thinner, shorter, and weaker strand. Eventually, the once mighty tree of the terminal hair becomes a translucent, microscopic blade of vellus hair, barely visible to the naked eye. The forest isn't being cut down. It is simply shrinking into nothingness. This biological sabotage is remarkably consistent across human populations, which tells us that the mechanism isn't a recent mutation. It is a deeply embedded feature of the human operating system. But if this process is so destructive to our appearance and our protection from the sun, why hasn't evolution weeded it out? Usually, if a trait makes you less fit for survival, it disappears. Yet, baldness is one of the most successful failures in the history of our species. There is a common myth that you can look at your mother's father to predict your own future hairline. You've likely heard this at a family gathering or read it on a health blog. It's a comforting idea because it gives us someone to blame, and there is a kernel of truth to it. The primary androgen receptor gene is indeed located on the X chromosome, which men inherit from their mothers. But this is where the simple explanation ends and the danger begins. If you rely on that one piece of folklore, you are ignoring the vast majority of the evidence. A massive 2017 study published in Nature Communications, which analyzed the genomes of over 52,000 men, found that baldness is what scientists call a polygenic trait. It isn't controlled by one baldness gene handed down by your grandfather. Instead, the researchers identified 287 distinct genetic regions that contribute to hair loss. Most of these have nothing to do with the X chromosome at all. They are scattered across the entire genome, inherited from both parents in a complex, unpredictable shuffle. This means the vanishing forest in our DNA is far older and more complex than a single family line. It is a mosaic of mutations that have been accumulating for tens of thousands of years. We aren't just looking at a quirk of inheritance, we are looking at a deep-seated evolutionary trade-off. Think of these 287 genetic markers as ancient footprints leading us back into the deep past. As the vanishing forest of our hair began to recede, it left clues about why our ancestors kept these genes around. One of the most compelling theories involves a concept called pleiotropy. This is when a single gene or a group of genes controls multiple, seemingly unrelated traits. In the case of baldness, the same genetic pathways that cause your hair to thin are also linked to other, much more beneficial biological processes. For example, Research has found a statistical correlation between the genes for male pattern baldness and increased bone mineral density. In a world where a broken leg was a death sentence, having stronger bones was a massive survival advantage. Other studies have suggested a link between these genes and a reduced risk of certain types of tumors or improved metabolic function. Evolution doesn't care if you look good in a mirror, it only cares if you live long enough to pass on your genes. If the price of having unbreakable bones and a robust metabolism was losing your hair at age 40, nature was more than happy to make that deal. The forest was sacrificed so the mountain could stand firm. But this raises a terrifying question. When did the first human actually notice their hair was disappearing? For a long time, historians assumed baldness was a modern problem, a byproduct of the fact that we now live much longer than our ancestors. The logic was simple. If the average hunter-gatherer died at 25 from an infected scratch or a hungry lion, they never lived long enough to see their hairline recede. But recent archaeological finds have shattered this assumption. Consider the case of Ötzi the Iceman, the incredibly well-preserved mummy found in the Alps in 1991. Ötzi lived roughly 5,300 years ago, during the Copper Age. When scientists performed a high-resolution genomic analysis on his remains, they found more than just his eye color or his last meal. They discovered that Ötzi was genetically predisposed to high-grade male pattern baldness. While some of his hair was preserved in the ice, the analysis of his scalp tissue suggests that by the time he died in his mid-40s, he was likely quite thin on top. Ötzi wasn't an outlier. He was a representative of a world where baldness was already a documented reality. The vanishing forest was already retreating 5 millennia ago, in a world of stone tools and nomadic tribes. As we track the vanishing forest even further back, we run into a major transition in human history, the Great Migration out of Africa. This happened roughly 40,000 to 60,000 years ago. Geneticists have noticed something strange when they compare the rates of baldness across different global populations. The genetic variants associated with heavy hair loss are significantly more common in populations of European and Middle Eastern descent than they are in East Asian or Sub-Saharan African populations. This suggests that while the machinery for baldness is ancient and universal, certain specific mutations that accelerate the process likely became more prevalent after humans moved into colder climates. This leads us to one of the most counterintuitive, facts in all of evolutionary biology, the vitamin D hypothesis. In the low-light environments of prehistoric Europe, survival depended on the skin's ability to absorb UV radiation to produce vitamin D. A thick head of hair is actually an obstacle to this process. Some researchers believe that a balding scalp may have acted like a biological solar panel, allowing older men, the ones with the most knowledge and experience, to absorb more sunlight and stay healthy during long, dark winters. In this scenario, the vanishing forest wasn't a failure, it was an adaptation. However, if baldness was just about sunlight, why does it only happen to men? Women need vitamin D just as much as men do, yet they rarely experience the same pattern of total scalp denudation. This suggests that the vanishing forest is serving a different purpose, one tied to the complex social hierarchies of our ancestors. Enter the work of Dr. Frank Muscarella and his colleagues at Barry University. In a series of influential studies published in journals like Evolutionary Psychological Science, Muscarella proposed that male pattern baldness evolved as a social signaling mechanism. To understand this, you have to imagine the social landscape of a prehistoric tribe. Physical aggression was a constant risk. A young man with a full, thick head of hair and high testosterone is a walking signal of competitive energy. He is a threat to the established order. But as a man ages and his hair begins to thin, his appearance changes in a very specific way. He doesn't look old in a frail sense, he looks mature. Muscarella's research found that people across different cultures consistently rate bald men as being less aggressive, more socially mature, more intelligent, and having higher social status. The retreating hairline was a signal to the rest of the tribe. I am no longer a competitor for physical dominance. I am a source of wisdom and stability. This creates an incredible biological paradox. Your body uses a byproduct of testosterone, the very hormone of aggression and youth, to create a look that signals the exact opposite. It's as if the vanishing forest is a white flag of truce, allowing older men to survive within the group without being challenged by younger, stronger males. This could explain why the genes for baldness have persisted for so long. A man who reached 40 and went bald was more likely to be seen as a non-threatening mentor, making him more likely to survive and ensure his children and grandchildren thrived. The hair wasn't lost, it was traded for social capital. But even with this social advantage, the loss of the forest has always carried a psychological weight. We see this in the earliest written records of humanity. The ancient Ebers Papyrus, an Egyptian medical text dating back to 1550 BC, contains dozens of cures for hair loss, ranging from fat from hippopotamuses to toasted greyhound legs. The fact that the ancient Egyptians were so desperate to fix a problem that was supposedly a social advantage tells us that the human ego has been at war with human biology for a very long time. As we look deeper into the vanishing forest, we find that the roots go back even further than the human species itself. To find the true origin of baldness, we have to look at our closest living relatives, the great apes. If you look at a chimpanzee or a stump-tailed macaque, you will see something hauntingly familiar. These primates can and do go bald in a pattern that looks remarkably like the human version. It starts at the forehead and moves back, eventually leaving the top of the head bare while the sides remain furry. This tells us that the biological pathway for baldness, the sensitivity of scalp follicles to androgens, likely predates the split between humans and chimps, which happened about 6 million years ago. We didn't invent baldness. We inherited a primate blueprint that was already predisposed to it. The vanishing forest is a legacy of the jungle itself. But humans did something unique with this blueprint. We coupled it with the most radical change in primate history: the loss of our body hair. Roughly 2 million years ago, our ancestor Homo erectus began to lose its thick coat of body fur to better regulate heat while running long distances on the African savanna. As the body hair vanished, the hair on our heads stayed thick and luxurious to protect our oversized brains from the blistering sun. This created the modern human configuration, a naked body with a mane on top. But the genes for baldness were still there, lurking in the background. They were the ghost in the machine, waiting for the right environmental or social conditions to express themselves. The danger of the savanna meant that hair was a shield, but as our societies became more complex and our lifespans began to creep upward, that shield started to be treated like a luxury. The vanishing forest didn't just happen once. It has been retreating and advancing in a million different directions across the human family tree for eons. Some lineages kept the forest thick until death, others saw it vanish before they hit 30. But here is where the science takes a sharp, ominous turn. While we've talked about baldness as a social signal or a vitamin D solar panel, there is a darker possibility that researchers are only just beginning to explore. It involves the idea of cellular senescence. Every cell in your body has a limit on how many times it can divide before it stops and becomes a zombie cell. A cell that is still alive but no longer functions correctly. Some scientists believe that the hair follicle is a sentinel for the rest of the body. Because hair follicles are some of the fastest dividing organs in the human body, they are often the first to hit their limit. The vanishing forest on your head might not be a signal for wisdom or a tool for sunlight. It might be an early warning system. It is a visible indicator of the biological aging happening deep inside your organs. When your hair starts to thin, it is your body's way of telling the world, and you, that the clock is ticking. This isn't just about aesthetics. It's about the fundamental limits of being a carbon-based life form. This brings us to a modern realization that would have shocked our ancestors. For most of human history, the vanishing forest was an unstoppable force of nature, as inevitable as the changing of the seasons. But in 1997, the landscape changed forever. That was the year the FDA approved a drug called finasteride for the treatment of male pattern baldness. For the first time in the history of our species, we found a way to bridge the chemical gap. By inhibiting the 5-alpha reductase enzyme, we could finally stop the conversion of testosterone into DHT. We learned how to unpoison the soil of the vanishing forest. But even with modern medicine, we are only fighting a delaying action. The underlying genetics, Those 287 regions of our DNA are still there, waiting. We can hold back the tide for a decade or two, but the ancient script is still running in the background. We are the first generation of humans that has even a slight hope of defying this evolutionary mandate, yet we still feel the same sting of loss that Otzi the Iceman likely felt as he looked at his reflection in a mountain pool. The psychological toll of the vanishing forest is so profound because it represents the first time many of us have to confront the fact that our bodies are not under our control. You can eat right, you can exercise, you can build a career, but you cannot stop the DHT from finding its target. This lack of agency is what drove the ancient Greeks to rub pigeon droppings on their heads and led the Romans to invent the comb-over to hide their shame. Julius Caesar was notoriously sensitive about his hair loss, often wearing his laurel wreath specifically to mask his receding hairline. He was the most powerful man in the world, yet he was powerless against a molecule. This recurring theme in history, the powerful man humbled by his own follicles, is proof that baldness has always been more than just a biological process. It is a memento mori, a reminder of our mortality that we carry with us every time we look in the mirror. As we look at the vanishing forest one last time, we have to ask, where is it going next? Evolution hasn't stopped. In our modern, high-stress, high-sugar, indoor world, the environmental factors that interact with our genes are changing faster than ever. Some researchers have noted that rates of hair loss seem to be appearing earlier in young men in urban environments than they did in previous generations. Is the vanishing forest accelerating? Are we moving toward a future where a full head of hair is a rare genetic anomaly? Or will our technology finally allow us to rewrite the script entirely? We are currently in a strange transitional period where we understand the how of baldness perfectly, but we are still struggling with the why. We can map every follicle and every enzyme, but we are still the same apes sitting in the savannah, wondering why the sun feels a little hotter on our scalps than it did the year before. Think back to that moment in the mirror, the comb in your hand and the cluster of hair in the teeth. It feels like a betrayal. But as we've seen, that betrayal is actually a deeply integrated part of what it means to be human. The vanishing forest is a bridge between you and the ancient past. It links you to the Copper Age hunters in the Alps, the scribes of ancient Egypt, the philosophers of Greece, and the very first primates who stood up on two legs. You aren't losing your hair. You are participating in a multi-million-year-old dialogue between your hormones and your history. The danger isn't that you are going bald. The danger is in forgetting that your body was never meant to be a static monument. It was meant to be a story, and stories have beginnings, middles, and ends. Your hair is just one chapter in that narrative, a chapter that evolution decided was worth shortening to save the rest of the book. The vanishing forest is not a sign of weakness. It is the price of admission for being a member of a species that chose a path of high testosterone, high intelligence, and complex social structures. We traded our fur for the ability to run, and we traded our scalp hair for the ability to signal wisdom and absorb the sun. Every time a follicle shuts down, it is a testament to the brutal efficiency of natural selection. It is a reminder that in the eyes of biology, beauty is a secondary concern to utility. The forest must recede so the individual can adapt, and the individual must adapt so the species can survive. Whether you see it as a loss or a transition, the fact remains that the vanishing forest is one of the most honest things your body will ever produce. It is a truth that cannot be hidden by hats or wigs for long. It is the ancient world making itself known in the modern day. The final realization, the one that truly dismantles our modern ego, is that we are not the masters of our own biology. We are the vessels for a set of instructions that have been refined by billions of deaths over millions of years. When your hair starts to go, you are witnessing the physical manifestation of a genetic if-then statement that was written before your ancestors knew how to make fire. It is an echo from the deep time of our evolution, a whisper from the savannah that tells us we are still, at our core, biological machines governed by the laws of chemistry and competition. The mirror doesn't lie, but it also doesn't tell the whole story. It only shows the surface. Beneath the scalp, the vanishing forest is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is following the path of least resistance toward a biological goal we are only just beginning to understand. You might think that your hair loss is a result of modern life, but the final shred of that assumption is destroyed by the cold reality of the genetic clock. The vanishing forest is not a modern plague, it is a prehistoric constant. We know this because when we look at the genetic divergence between human populations, we find that the primary mutations for androgenetic alopecia, the specific on switches for the vanishing forest, were already fully locked into the human genome at least 40,000 years ago. This wasn't a slow drift that happened over time. It was a definitive, functional change that occurred just as our ancestors were conquering the planet. You aren't losing your hair because of your diet, your stress, or your shampoo. You are losing it because 1,600 generations ago, a specific set of survival conditions decided that the forest on your head was no longer necessary for the story to continue. The mirror is still there, and the comb is still in your hand. But now, you know the truth behind the paradox. Your body isn't failing you, it is completing its ancient work. The vanishing forest is a signal of a trade made eons ago, a trade for bones, for sunlight, and for status. It is the most visible proof we have that we are the descendants of survivors, people who were willing to give up a part of themselves to ensure the rest of us could be here to wonder why. So, the next time you see a few more strands in the sink, don't just see a loss. See the ancient world reaching out to touch the present. See the 40,000-year-old script finally reaching its climax. It's a quiet, personal ice age, and like the one that Otzi the Iceman lived through, it is something you were always meant to endure. And if you're sitting there wondering if there's a secret to stopping it that the ancient Egyptians missed, just remember, they had the fat of a lion and the leg of a greyhound, and it still didn't work. We have molecular biology and FDA-approved inhibitors, and even then, we are only arguing with the inevitable. The vanishing forest has its own schedule, and it doesn't care about our plans. If this dive into the deep history of our own biology was as fascinating for you as it was for me, I'd love for you to join the circle. It's a community for those who want to look beneath the surface of the mundane and see the ancient gears grinding away. Subscribe and stay curious, because there is always another layer to the story, and the most ordinary things are often the most ancient. We often tell ourselves that we are the architects of our own identity, that the way we look is a reflection of our choices or our modern environment. But the truth is much more haunting. You are currently carrying a biological program that was perfected 40,000 years ago, a literal genetic countdown that doesn't care about your style or your confidence. When you look in the mirror and see that receding line, you aren't looking at a personal flaw, you are looking at the exact moment a 40,000-year-old evolutionary instruction finally executed its command. Every single one of us is just a temporary home for a process that began in the prehistoric dark, and as of today, the score remains: Evolution 1, Human Vanity 0.